For those of you already here, we're going to record this session. In fact, we're recording now. So if you would rather not have your face on show, then please turn your camera off. We've asked for you to mute just so that we can get the best possible sound quality on this recording. We will make sure that there's time for some questions at the end of this talk. And what we'd love for you to do, if you've got a question, is to put that into the chat. As I say, we're so encouraged by the number of people that have joined us. I think we have about 74 people so far in this meeting, which is a huge encouragement to us. But as you can imagine, that would be quite tricky to have a chat afterwards with a cup of tea. So we're going to do that Q&A through the Zoom chat, if you don't mind. So just type your messages in and we'll do our very best to make time for some questions and answers at the end. So I think we'll make a start. As I say, it's really great to have you all with us. Thank you for coming to talk about a subject that we all know is very difficult, but so very current, assisted suicide. We'll be spending time thinking about what assisted suicide is, what we can learn from the countries that have already legalised assisted suicide and why this leaves us feeling concerned. And then what would we as Christians, how might we respond to this debate, this discussion? I'll be sharing some thoughts as a hospice nurse, but also as a Christian. And we will also just hear a bit about what's happening politically. Obviously, this is a really quick changing situation, so we'll bring you up to speed with that. And then what can we all do? What can we do practically and what can we do prayerfully? But we enter into this realizing that at the heart of all of this are people. That's actually you and I, isn't it? We all come to this subject with our own personal experiences, our own personal losses and sadnesses that help actually inform some of our thinking around this already. So this could be quite hard for some of us to hear. And I guess with that in mind, just take time to pause as you need to, be in touch with me afterwards if I can help at all with any of the things that we raise. We realise, you know, this is weighty, and I am sorry in advance if this causes any hurt to you as we cover this important subject. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. I'm hoping you can see that Christians in Care logo. Can someone give me a thumbs up? Yep, Josh, thank you. There we go. So I'm Lucy Honeysett. I think some of you know me. I help lead the work of Christians in Care, which is a new network that seeks to support Christians who work across the care sector, supporting them in their work and also helping them to live and speak for Jesus in the roles that they do. I'm also a hospice nurse, and I've worked in a variety of settings looking after people who are dying in the hospital, in care homes, in the hospice and in people's own homes. And I'm so delighted to be joined by Dr Gillian Wright from our duty of care. Gillian was a palliative care doctor, and then she moved into research medical ethics and now helps lead the work of our duty of care, which is part of Care Not Killing. And our duty of care is a campaign that brings together people who work in health and now social care too, who are all opposed to assisted suicide. So I'm actually going to hand over to Gillian now. We've covered what we're going to cover, and I'll take you through to Gillian. Over to you, Gillian. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Lucy. It's lovely to be here with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity. It's incredibly timely, this particular webinar, and most of you will have maybe seen the news over the last 48 hours, last 3 or 4 days, that there's going to be a private member's bill brought to Westminster on the topic of assisted dying or assisted suicide. And so it's really helpful to have this opportunity to talk about the topic. As Lucy said, my background was as a palliative care doctor, and then I changed to medical research. And the last 3 or 4 years, I've been working on a campaign to try and bring people together to express our concerns about assisted suicide, because it's very understandable that nobody wants to see suffering at the end of life, and people might imagine that assisted suicide could be an option, but it's hugely more complicated, and I hope we can explore some of these issues today. Next slide, thanks. Just by way of introduction, I guess both Lucy and I have come from a background of palliative care, and I imagine many of you on the call will have done different aspects of palliative care. And I suppose that it's the essence of palliative care is to help people live well until they die, to give people hope, to help them adjust to their terminal condition. It can be provided by a number of different sectors, by the generalist team, so the GP, the district nurses, and the wider social care sector. But also if things are particularly difficult, it can be provided with a specialist palliative care team, and they're most often based in hospices and in hospitals. So I'm conscious that many of you might be involved in these teams, in different layers of teams, but also might have had personal experience as well. So I hope this is a helpful overview. Yes, we are hoping that the slides will be available afterwards, and these are just by way of illustration, not that you necessarily need to pore over all the detail, just that palliative care is complex. And maybe at the beginning, I think it's important to say that palliative care, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is not fully funded by the NHS. And Marie Curie estimate that 1 in 4 people don't access palliative care at the end of life. So there's a huge hole in our public services, as we know, and we are not meeting the needs. And so it's understandable that people might be distressed or depressed at the end, and seek out assisted suicide. Next slide, thanks. So just by way of introduction, I think it is helpful to consider what we mean by the different terms. The bill which is coming before Parliament is called assisted dying, and that really encompasses 2 different processes. Assisted suicide is when the doctor prescribes a lethal medicine, usually a barbiturate, it can be different things, that the patient is able to take themselves. And so the doctor is responsible for the prescription, but the patient takes the medication themselves. And that's what we generally call assisted suicide. Euthanasia is when the doctor administers and prescribes the lethal medication. So it's usually a lethal injection, and that's what they use in Canada. So when we talk of medical assistance in dying in Canada, 99% of it's euthanasia. So assisted suicide is the person takes the medicine themselves. Euthanasia is when it's administered by the doctor, and generally the bill, which has been called assisted dying, refers to assisted suicide, and it refers to when the patient is able to take it themselves. It does refer generally to when a patient is able to have capacity to make that decision. They're mentally competent or have capacity. So it generally doesn't refer to those who have dementia, but we know in places like Belgium or the Netherlands, they do euthanise patients who have dementia or other psychiatric illnesses. And perhaps we can explore that later. Next slide, thanks. So I think this is just by way of introduction, just to say that there are lots of people with concerns about this. So the BMA, which is the National Trade Union of Doctors, went neutral about 2 years ago. So there was about a 50-50 split in the BMA, and so it has become neutral. But I just want to say that many of you, I imagine, on the call are concerned about assisted suicide, and you're not alone. When the Scottish bill has been more, I don't know if there are any Scots on the call, you can wave at me if you can, but if you've been in Scotland and seen any of the Scottish press in the last 2 or 3 years, you'll know that we have our own bill in the Scottish Parliament, which is called the MacArthur Bill. And so because of that, the Association for Palliative Medicine hold, well, it wasn't technically the APN poll, that there was a poll of the Association of Palliative Medicine Doctors, and interesting data found that 95% would not prescribe lethal medicine and 97% would not administer, and 43% would resign if their organisation undertook assisted dying. Now, there's absolutely no doubt that palliative medicine is the most opposed. So GPs tend to be opposed, care of the elderly doctors tend to be opposed, and it tends to be those doctors who have less direct involvement who are less opposed, so radiologists, anaesthetists, folk like that. But it's just to encourage you that there are doctors who are absolutely at the sharp end of looking after the most difficult symptom control, who really are uncomfortable about assisted dying, and are really concerned about this. Next slide. I know Julie's got a question, but I don't know whether we can see it just now or whether if it's something for later. Maybe put it in the chat and we can answer it on the way along if we can see that. So I just want to spend a little bit of time. I'm conscious of we do have limited time, but what's wrong with assisting a suicide? Next slide, thanks. Well, the main concerns we have as clinicians and others are particularly for vulnerable groups. Oh, thank you, Julie. That was away from Scotland. This is the danger when you ask questions, actually people respond, which is lovely. Thank you so much. It's nice to see you. We're just to say that we're really concerned for vulnerable groups. So I think there's been a bit of discussion over the weekend, particularly those perhaps with chronic mental health conditions, those who are homeless, those who might feel a particular pressure to take their own life, those, for example, in coercive relationships, so that when facing a terminal diagnosis, they might be at particular risk of taking their own life. So we are concerned for those who are most vulnerable. We're concerned for those who might be anxious in coming to see a doctor. For example, we know there is data that particularly some ethnic minorities are concerned about coming to the doctor, and we'd be concerned that trust in the doctor-patient relationship or nurse-patient relationship or carer-patient relationship would be eroded if they felt that healthcare was involved in taking life. And so that trust, which in many ways we have lost over recent years, we might lose even more. And it's really important to try and preserve that relationship of trust. I think the third reason is that we would stand on the fact that patients' lives have value and worth, that they are of immeasurable value and worth. And if we say that some lives are not worth living, if that some patients we would encourage to take their own lives, whereas others we would discourage from taking on their own lives, then we would say, well, actually, there's a discrepancy and some lives are of less value. And many disabled people are concerned about this legislation because it would undermine their worth. And then a final concern is that it may be billed or it may be portrayed as a very narrow bill, but actually there's real concerns it might extend. And we can think of some of those examples. Next question. This is just almost a little aside. I think sometimes it's portrayed in the media as assisted suicide's the answer. It is a panacea, it's a peaceful, sometimes a very easy death in a way, and I think many of you might have sat with people for difficult deaths, and I absolutely understand why it must be distressing and frustrating to think, why does this have to go on so long? Why could a simple injection not just take this suffering away for this person and their family? And I just want to draw your attention to the fact that assisted suicide has its own problems. So there's a range of about 7% of problems with assisted suicide. One example is seizures. So some patients would have seizures in response to any medication like this. Some patients might be sick and regurgitate the medicine, and some might have a prolonged period to death. So rather than it being 2 to 4 hours, which might be the average, some might take several days to die. And the longest in the Oregon data was several days, 6 or 7 days. So the question is, what do we do then? What do you do at that point? What does the district nurse who is sitting with the patient do? What does the paramedic do when they are called and the patient hasn't died? And there was quite a robust response to the Scottish bill from the Scottish Ambulance Service, which was really interesting to read. And they said, what do we do? Where do we take the patient, and what problems do we face? And I think it's helpful as those who are involved in health and social care that we alert people to these issues. It is not that palliative care is full of problems and assisted suicide has no problems. Assisted suicide has problems too. Next slide, thanks. Well, how safe are the safeguards? Not safe at all. Next slide, thanks. So some of you might remember Humza Yousaf, maybe Julie and others. He was the First Minister of Scotland, and he had a really helpful meeting with Tressa Burke, who is one of the leaders of the Glasgow Disability Alliance. A number of disability groups are really not keen to speak out on this topic because they represent a wide range of people. And I think there are concerns about funding, as there are with the hospices as well. And so many have taken a neutral position. But the GDA has actually been really outspoken, and they said there is no amount of safeguarding with any legislation that could offer enough protections to stop disabled people being pressurised into assisted dying when no health, social care or other support is available. And one of the ladies in their leadership team said that she was previously in favour of assisted dying, but when she saw how poorly disabled people were treated during COVID, she felt that there could be no circumstances in which she felt they would be safely managed in an assisted suicide legal framework. So just an interesting perspective. Next slide, thanks. Some examples I think are helpful. I'm conscious of time, but I think if you are interested in the topic, want to look a bit further, Canada has been a really concerning example over the last 8 to 10 years. It was initially brought in as assisted suicide and euthanasia for terminal conditions, but then it was challenged in the courts. So a lady with a chronic arthritis who was 79 said she should be just as eligible as someone with a terminal illness. And so the law was extended. It was found that it was unfair to exclude her. And so it was extended to those with chronic physical conditions. And then it's also been extended to those with chronic psychiatric conditions, but with the caveat that they have not brought it into force yet. It's not been brought in until 2027. And that's really because of international outcry, real concerns from psychiatrists. How do we implement this safely? So it has been adopted but not implemented. So I think that would be the way. So you can see how the slippery slope has unfolded, rather than mixing my metaphors. They're sliding down the slippery slope, as quickly as quicker than you might expect. So next slide, thanks. This is actually one of the disability organisations' pictures, and it's quite a hard cartoon, I think, in some ways, but I think it does illustrate the fact that there may be some people being helped to take their own life at one end of a hospital, and others who are being prevented at another. And there are real concerns for suicide prevention, and that there would be a two-tier service, that a ramp would be provided for those seeking assisted suicide, but not for those seeking prevention. And there are really quite unpleasant and distressing stories actually from Canada about those who have sought psychiatric help, those who have sought supported care, veterans who have sought support, for example, for PTSD, and have been offered assisted suicide MAID, as it's called in Canada. So really concerning stuff there. Next slide, thanks. And just to say, Canada is not an isolated case. The Netherlands brought in assisted suicide in 2002 for terminal conditions in adults, and it is now extended to include dementia, chronic illness, psychiatric conditions. Again, relatively small numbers, but it's definitely eligible. There are a really chilling review of those who have learning disability and autism in the Netherlands, and there is a legal framework for euthanasia for disabled babies under 1, which is really concerning. So you can see how the principle, when it's adopted as a principle that there's a right to take your own life, that's approved as a healthcare treatment, then the slippery slope is just so evident. Next slide, if you can. Thank you. Yeah, if anyone works particularly with those who have learning disability, I could send you this paper. Irene Tafriwinia is a nursing professor of learning disability, and she reviewed 39 cases in the Netherlands and really concerned about the reasons for which euthanasia was approved. Thanks. Next slide, thanks. Again, just to show you small numbers, but increasing for dementia. Next slide, thanks. And that there are even cases of involuntary euthanasia. So when the patient cannot consent, and these are documented in cases, the elderly, those in coma or dementia. Next slide, thanks. About a half of those in Oregon cite feeling a burden on caregivers as the reason they choose assisted suicide. Next slide, thanks. And this is a chap, Prof. Cohen Almager, who is actually in favour of assisted suicide, but in one of his reviews, he observed that virtually every guideline has been breached or violated, and it's just so incredibly difficult to keep the log, because the safeguard is the prohibition of killing. That is the line in the sand. That is the bulwark that keeps us safe. And when you erode that, then it's very difficult to get back from it. Next slide, and then we can just move on just 1 or 2 moments. Perfect. That should be me in time. Thanks.
Sorry, Gillian. Moving on literally meant moving on to me, but thank you so much for all that you've shared there. There's a lot to take on board, isn't it? If you've heard that for the first time, there is so much there, and I'd encourage you to check out our Duty of Care website or Care Not Killing website to really give yourself time to process some of that. Now, there'll be a little bit of overlap as I now talk a little bit more, perhaps from a Christian perspective, and also as my experience as a hospice nurse. And I guess what I wanted to do was for us to gently consider some of the reasons why people say they want assisted suicide, or the campaigns that support assisted suicide. What reasons are they giving? And some of that is around dignity. And we've already covered the fact that we are, as individuals, priceless and irreplaceable. I think whether you're a Christian or not, you would agree that when someone dies, you simply can't replace that person. Once they've gone, they've gone. And if you're of Christian belief, you know that really is because God has made us, and we've been made in his image. And I think it's important as well for us to work out, where does our dignity and worth come from? And it's helpful to think it's not because of what we do, but it is because of who we are. So if we can no longer do the things that are of use to society or of use to the people around us, our intrinsic value doesn't diminish. We are still of great value because of who we are, not because of what we do. Biblically, we know it's clear in the Bible that we really should not take a life. It's part of the 10 Commandments. This conversation is more complex than just taking someone's life, killing someone, but it's there, isn't it? And I don't think we should shy away from that. So even asking or expecting a doctor to prescribe lethal medication is unreasonable, and we don't want anybody to take their own life. And we've already alluded to the fact that in this country, there's a sense of irony that we have a great focus on suicide prevention, which of course is right. We don't want anybody to feel suicidal, and we want to do all that we can to support people who have these feelings of no worth and life not worth living. And yet with the assisted suicide bill, there's a sense that would promote suicide in a certain group of people, which just doesn't marry up. It doesn't make sense to us. Also, I think it's helpful to think from the Bible's perspective, we're created to be dependent by design. We're not created to do life alone. Ultimately, we're created to lean into our Creator as the sort of provider of purpose and comfort, but also we're to carry one another's burdens, never to be considered a burden, but to be with one another, walk alongside one another. And if there is somebody who feels that life is no longer worth living because they no longer have dignity or a sense of worth, then our response to that should be to journey alongside that person and do all that we can to affirm them and bring them fulfillment in life, bring them comfort, bring them peace, bring them a sense of worth and belonging, and I hope also help them meet the Lord, but that might not be possible. But that's our role, not to just extinguish them and get rid of what we might perceive as the problem. Another element to all of this is the intolerable suffering that people may endure. And the MP who's managed to bring this bill into discussion, I think she quoted that the three options available to people at the moment is intolerable suffering and a dreadful death, or for you to have an expensive journey to Dignitas, which rules that's not possible for some people, or to commit suicide, take your own life, which of course is also filled with complexity. I think it's important in response to things like that we don't undermine the suffering that might be experienced by some. We're living in a broken world, and yes, there is great suffering. So our response to that is that we would want to ease that suffering and acknowledge it. The Bible certainly doesn't shy away from suffering. Of course, we know that Jesus himself suffered ultimate pain. Jesus wept. We also know of Elijah in 1 Kings, where actually he was suicidal. He wanted his life to end, but God met both his practical and spiritual need in that moment. I would say as well, though, from a perspective as a hospice nurse, that physical suffering isn't always the bit that people would define as suffering. And in fact, when we look at other countries and the reasons why people have opted for assisted suicide, very often physical suffering isn't the main reason that they give for why they want to end their life prematurely. Often it is more of the spiritual and psychological pain that people experience. And as I say, as a hospice nurse, I've heard people ask questions just like this, which maybe you can relate to as well and may have asked yourself. Why me? I can't put my family through this. I can't face losing control. What's the point of all of this? I'm frightened. Where's God at a time like this? And we know that these questions are essentially cries from the heart, aren't they? You may have asked them yourselves. You may have heard people asking them. And as a hospice nurse, it's been my privilege to listen well to people who are trusting me with this kind of heart cry. And I guess it brings us back to that need to invest in services that are around people who are living with terminal illness, to be sure that their total pain, so not purely their physical suffering, but also the spiritual and psychological and relational and social suffering that they might experience, that we look to meet that too. We make time to listen well to that and do all that we can to ease that suffering, often by purely being present and not leaving people to journey alone in their illness and in their dying. Of course, we also know, if you are of Christian faith here today, that Jesus wants to meet us in these moments of suffering. I can testify to that personally and professionally, that can be a remarkable time, a very tender time when the Lord meets us in these moments of suffering. He certainly doesn't want to observe from a distance. He wants to presence himself, and he wants to provide care, and obviously ultimately wants to rescue people at this time of real questioning in life. One of the other reasons people give is a desire for control and for independence. And I think perhaps if we're all honest with ourselves, we quite like a degree of independence. We like to have control on life. I think when life can feel a bit frightening or we can feel a bit anxious, it's often because we've got so many plates that are spinning, and that sense of not really knowing what to do next and how it all feels. So I guess we can all relate to that. But I would say for people that I've looked after who are facing death, facing the knowledge that their illness can no longer be cured, it's understandable that there would be a sense of fear around losing control over their future, losing control perhaps over their body and their function. It's important to say here that here in the UK, people can actually have some degree of control over their end of life. And we call that advanced care planning, when we make time to listen to what are people's priorities. That might include things like, I don't want to go back to hospital, I prefer to stay at home. So we record proper ceilings of treatment so that those wishes are maintained, even at a time when somebody may not have a voice and be well enough to say that for themselves. If we've had good conversations in advance with people and their loved ones about what's important to them, we can do all that we can to make sure that their end of life care is centered around them. That might also include where they want to be at the end of life. It sometimes can even be a more formal plan, a legally binding plan that says, I would want to refuse certain treatments that might be on offer to me so that my life isn't prolonged unnecessarily. I want to welcome death when death comes. And again, that's an investment in end-of-life care, in palliative care, and in all of the health and social care services, so that people are able to access the proper care and support and advanced care planning that is already available to people here in the UK. I think as well, it's important to think that we're not actually created to bear the weight of control and independence. Even though we yearn for it, and right at the very beginning of creation with Adam and Eve, there was that desire to have God's mind, have his understanding. We have that tension, I think, that exists in all of us from time to time with our relationship with God, that we want control and independence from him. We want to have that feeling of knowing that we're boss. And yet we're not created to be able to cope with that. God doesn't ask for us to be that independent. For us to flourish, I think he wants us to share our cares with him, to share that burden and not take on all of that ourselves. And we can see that, sadly, even probably in your own lives, but also in society, that actually we can't necessarily be trusted to know right from wrong all of the time. We get stuff wrong. And it's important that we don't think that as a society we can suddenly make big God-like decisions about life and death when actually we're fallen and we get that wrong. Important as well to just think about life being a gift. And thinking again as a hospice nurse, the number of conversations I've had with people who say things like, when, Lucy, would you suggest, if I could take my life, when would I take my life? When would you say would be the right timing for this? And so often people say they just don't know when they would want to do this because they don't know what tomorrow might bring. And in my experience of looking after people at the end of life for many years now, there are remarkable moments of joy in the last months, weeks, days, even sometimes hours of life, that if somebody had had control and independence and been able to take their life sooner, they would have missed out on these truly remarkable moments. And the people that love them would have also missed out on this. We've not really focused today on what it might be like as a family member to hear a loved one say that they want to take their life and they want to end it sooner. But for the vast majority of families that I've supported at the end of life, they want every possible second with the person they love. They don't want that person to leave them earlier than they have to. And we want to make time at the end of life for people to find the true meaning to life, the true purpose of life. Create time to say things like, I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, and to say thank you. So I'm sure there are many other reasons why we might be opposing assisted suicide from a Christian point of view and from a palliative care point of view, but that's just some thoughts there for you to ponder on. Back to you, Gillian, if you're ready to come back. There you are. Lovely.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think so. One of the questions is that it seems quite overwhelming, and what can we do in response to this? I think one of the questions there I was just looking at was is there a database of the evidence? And there's a website called Keep Assisted Dying Out of Healthcare, so KADOH.UK, CADO.UK, in which there is a good presentation of the different tiers of evidence about concerns. So I could pop that on the chat when I come off, but certainly, and on our website, it's more of a campaigning style website, but there are links to the evidence that it is there. So hopefully that's useful for you. If you're concerned about this issue, then the main thing to do at the moment is to engage with your MP. So the bill has been proposed by a private member. So one MP has proposed this bill. It's not a government bill in the sense that Labour's not bringing the bill, but it is very much supported by Keir Starmer, as many of you will know. So the real concern is that we don't know how many of these MPs will vote, and they do work for you. They are your representative, and you have a real experience of caring for the most frail and the people at the end of life, and many of them will not. So part of my job has been speaking to, particularly to MSPs. So because we've had a bill in the Scottish Parliament, I've been speaking to lots of MSPs, and it's actually been really interesting. Some of you look horrified at the thought of it, I can see, but actually, once I got over my initial kind of anxiety, I just treated it like talking to any other person, like you would treat, in a hospital consultation, or just talking to somebody you work with, and I asked them about them and their families and their experiences and what concerns they have. Do they have a firm position? Oh, thanks, Dave. Yeah, that's brilliant. It's my kind of go-to. So yeah, I just talk to them, and then I explain a bit about where I come from and what I think about it and my concerns. But they are real people, and some of them have no experience of healthcare at all. Some of them are accountants, or they've worked in, some of them have just worked in local council for many years. And I remember going to see one chap and just saying, I'm really concerned about coercion, and he'd not even thought about that as an issue. And when you've worked with families and the difficulties of families, you could imagine that people might feel under pressure. So you have a richness of experience that they may not have, and actually I've often found that they are asking for what different people are thinking, and they actually, I remember even seeing Nicola Sturgeon writing in the press that she was asking for constituents to come forward and speak to her in her constituency surgery. So at the moment, this is an old slide. So at the moment, the real thing to do is to write to your MP. If you don't know who your MP is, there's a website called theyworkforyou.com. And if you put in your postcode, then it'll tell you who your MP is. And we can provide you with a sort of basic letter that Lucy can send on after the webinar. But basically it just says, I am, I would say I'm a doctor. I used to be a palliative care doctor, and I looked after terminally ill patients. I'm concerned about issues of pressure, coercion, about the devaluing of those who have disabilities. And I have got a number of family situations that I could share with you as well. Please, could I have an appointment to speak with you in your constituency? Generally, they're in their constituencies on Fridays and Mondays. And time is of the essence. We don't know when this bill is going to be debated, but it looks as if it's going to be soon. So, this Friday, next Friday, that would be brilliant if you could do that. I think there's one more slide. Thank you. Yes, so writing is wonderful. Visiting would be even better. So this is an example. I not really just to show you her, but in the Scottish Parliament, we actually, because we've got proportional representation, we actually have 8 MSPs you can go and see. So I went to see this lady in her constituency surgery. So I don't know how many of you know about the way the politics work, but many of them will have a surgery. It might be once a month, it might be once a fortnight. This one was in Ardrossan, which is actually on the coast. So I went there, and you should be able to find a sort of local place. They're often in libraries, community halls, church halls, that sort of thing. And sometimes they're at front of Asda, that kind of thing. So just, I would look out when you're going to pick up kids from places, wherever you're going, in the supermarket, just for these kind of posters. And then you might suddenly say, they're here on Fridays at 11:30 till 1:30 or whatever, and you can just drop in. The one thing I would say is that MP security is actually very high. You'll understand why. And so even these surgeries, they often require you to book a place or to phone and say it's you coming. So I would just read what it says on the poster or look at what it says on their website, and then phone the office or say, you know, I'd like to come and speak to you or whatever. There was a really helpful, I think, note in the chat there just about people's personal experiences. I have got a really good friend who went to speak to her local MP. At the moment, she's not working. She used to be, but she's not at the moment. And a good deal of what she's doing at the moment is looking after her mother-in-law, who is very frail. And she just explained her situation, what she's doing, the difficulties, the stresses, the ups and downs, the vulnerabilities of that, and the concerns of that legislation in her particular scenario. And she has her experience is valid. And, you know, it's important that constituents input, you know, gets into MPs. Now, what's this? Does the bill state who would carry out the assisted dying? So the Westminster bill, we actually have no details at all yet. The Scottish bill says it would be 2 doctors. So a doctor would both prescribe and then likely and administer, but you'd need to have a second doctor kind of okay it. The thing in the Scottish bill is it's saying it's expecting that it will be your own GP that will do this. And so GPs are really concerned about this. It's not going to be like a Dignitas clinic somewhere, you know, out the way in the, you know, off in the hills. It's going to be, you know, it's part of healthcare. That's what's really concerning about this. It's going to become a healthcare treatment that people can choose. So really concerning. So sorry, move on from Katie, and yeah, these are our poor Katie. I'm sure wouldn't want to be in my my publicity anyway. Never mind. She was just the last one I've seen. So our duty of care. Yeah, Dave, thank you so much. So our duty of care.org.uk, carenotKilling.org.uk. You're absolutely right, Dave, because what happens is if we all send the same email, you know, a kind of print out from Care Not Killing or a print out from our duty of care, then people just don't read it. And you can, and all the emails just get deleted, you know, all the way down. So if there's any way you can just make it more of your own story, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, you know, 3 carefully constructed arguments. It just has to be your concern and your experience and your thoughts. So that's much more powerful than, you know, a really glib and sophisticated kind of letter that we could spend ages kind of making it completely tight. And it's more true, you know, it's your experience. And so yeah, so from Josh, do we have any idea when the debates are likely to take place? So we expect the bill to be published next week, and so we hopefully will know the detail of it then. So it's very likely to be, for those who want to know the what we're thinking about, it's very likely to be similar to the Faulkner bill, which is the bill that's in the House of Lords at the moment. If anybody wants, I can send that to them, which is basically 2 doctors, 6 months, terminal illness, mental capacity. That's the kind of you know, the stringent things. And the debate could be any time after that, to be honest. So it's likely to be, well, we just don't know. It's as early as 2 weeks, you know, maybe 4 weeks, it may be 6 weeks. It's very likely to be before Christmas, I would say. But sorry, I should let other people answer questions. I think that's just about me.
You don't need to let anyone else answer questions. It's wonderful that you're answering questions. I just wanted to share that we are going to provide some end-of-life care training from Christians in Care. And I think that is because one of the very valid arguments why we're opposing assisted suicide, or the debate on this now, is because we know there's huge strain on the health and social care service right now. You know that personally, I'm sure, the struggle to get appointments, the delay in surgery, the lack of care, etc. So why would we be bringing in death as a solution to that, when in fact we could be investing in these crucial health and social care services? So there's that argument. And I guess to just come alongside that, at Christians in Care, we just want to provide some end-of-life care training for carers who work across the care sector. Many of you have joined us on this Zoom call today, which we're so grateful for. So just a bit of an update, because we're passionate about good end-of-life care, and we want to support you in the provision of good end-of-life care. And then just what are we asking? Well, we're saying let's keep the conversation going. The fact that we're all here today, it just helps us keep thinking about these things. Hearing from Gillian fires us up, doesn't it? It helps us think more carefully about what's happening in other countries. Why are we worried about this? So keep that conversation going among your family, your friends, within your churches, within your workplace. Please contact your MP. Time is of the essence. And if, as Gillian has said, if you want some help with that as to how you might just make your story known, then please get in touch with me. And then if it's Gillian that would be better able to help, then I'll certainly get in touch with Gillian. So the best way is probably hello@christiansincare.org. That would come through to me, and I'll try and help you with that. And then, of course, let's pray. I think God's given us a window of opportunity now to really pray into this situation. And we have complete confidence that we're approaching a God who is in control. He is mighty, he is at work, he's able to do more than we could ever imagine or ask. And for that, we're hugely relieved and grateful. So I'm going to stop sharing because it's nice to see more faces, which is really lovely. I'm also going to pause our recording.